Hello, my name is Charles Runnels, and I have something to say about the recent mass shooting. But before I do, I'll tell you my biases. Actually, I have several biases. One is that I was brought up in a home where, as a child, I had a shotgun and a rifle. But before you decide what that might mean, it might be helpful to know that the same dad who bought me that shotgun and rifle took me to death row to visit prisoners there, and for whatever reason I was brought up so totally colorblind that to this day I have trouble understanding. I've just really given up understanding why people decide to hate each other because of what scripture they read or how much pigment they have in their skin. So those are my biases. I grew up with guns in my home, and I have visited people on death row by choice, and think that for some reason it's not so good that people leave that part out of the scriptures where we're supposed to visit prisoners, not just the people in the hospital. My other bias is that I worked for 12 years as a physician in the emergency room, and so I have cared for those who have been shot. I've pronounced over 1,000 people dead for various reasons, and so have an understanding of death at least as much as any mortal might. So here's the thing that is disturbing to me, that is mentioned in a few of the reports of the past few mass shootings, but then gets left out of most of them following up. In at least 2 of the past 3 mass shootings, the person who did the shooting had something happen that caused them to be evaluated by mental health professionals. It's not clear from the news report whether it was a physician, psychiatrist, therapist, but for some reason both police and mental health professionals were involved. Sometime fairly recently, before the shootings took place. So here's the part that a layperson may not know. And again, I don't even want to climb into the gun control thing. I just want to bring up another dimension about maybe there's other factors that should be seriously talked about in the news in addition to what to do with our guns. So as an ER doctor for 12 years, if you came into my emergency room in the 1990s, and you had said something that indicated that you were homicidal or suicidal, in other words, you want to take either your life or the life of another person, then you lost your rights as a citizen. And if I let you go home and you committed murder or suicide, as a physician, I was held responsible for that destruction, as it should be. Because if I'm made aware of the fact you want to harm yourself or another person, and I let you go freely out to do that, I should be held responsible. So again, I'm not casting blame at the mental health professionals that saw these people just prior to their acts of mass murder. Because let me tell you what else happened. During the 1990s, things changed. Here's what changed that may not be obvious to the to most lay people. When I first started working in the ER, all those surrounding hospitals, including the one where I worked, had a psychiatric ward. So if you were suicidal or homicidal and had other symptoms of schizophrenia or mental health disease, I could hold you against your will, usually involves some sort of pharmacological sedation. The things that you see in the movies about being strapped to the wall didn't really happen, except whatever restraint needed to happen before I could get something in you to calm you down. And then oftentimes with the right medication, after being in the psychiatric ward, you would go home with a normal mental state and live with your family. but it might take days or weeks in the psychiatric ward to make that happen. So what happened in the 1990s is those psychiatric wards were shut down due to funding. And again, I'm not a politician. I don't know what happened with that money. I know that it became necessary to figure out a way to put people on enough medicines that they could go home and somehow function, because there was no bed to put them in. So it was either jail or a regular hospital bed, which was not appropriate. It meant that a private nurse had to be sitting there with you to make sure you didn't literally get out of the bed, try to harm yourself. Where in a psychiatric ward, those dangers are not available. So you're in a room where there's nothing you can do to hurt yourself. You know, the walls are literally padded so that you can't harm yourself. A regular hospital room is not set up that way. So then starting in the 90s, when the things shut down, because my understanding is there was no funding, no more money to keep them open, and like normal, even like the normal medical illnesses, doctors and hospitals are under pressure to send people home much, much sooner than they were 20 years ago. And if they keep them there, they lose money. They have to pay out of their pocket to take care of them. The doctor's spending time for free. The hospital's spending money they don't have. And literally, people are, nobody asks you to feel sorry for them, but they're having to spend money they don't have. It's already strapped for money. And so the result is, to keep that from happening, the hospital just shuts the mental ward down. And so, because of that, you see things like I did recently when I visited Cleveland. I'm walking down the street, and unlike the street where I'm walking now, which is surrounded by horses and trees, in Cleveland, almost every block, there's someone that, to my southern self, appears to need a mental hospital. Oh, the other bias is that I did live out of my car for a year. So by choice, I wanted to live with nothing, the way Thoreau did in Walden, the way Gandhi did, died with a loincloth and a pair of spectacles. That's all he owned. I wanted to feel that spiritual nothing connection to the planet as far as material things go. I did spot myself a car to sleep in, and so I understand there are other reasons for living on the street than either lack of money or being schizophrenic. But my observation as a physician who's taken care of probably 30,000 people plus over the past 25 years is that when I walk up to the corner and there's a man there disheveled and looking hungry, and he's talking to an invisible person, or the very next block, I pass a man who threatens me physically, but I can tell that he's not really seeing me, he's seeing through me. So as a physician, I can tell there's no reason for me to blame him, although I could literally, truly be physically in harm's way. So I'm careful with him as I would be in the emergency room. So if you came in and you were psychotic and schizophrenic and you were threatening me physically as an ER doctor, completely, totally unethical if I act out against you, because you're not responsible for what you're doing. It's my responsibility as a physician to sedate you and calm you down and protect you from yourself and to protect your loved ones from you and try to get you as best we can to a right mental state and home as soon as possible. So when I'm walking down the streets of Cleveland and I see someone threaten me that looks like they belong in a mental hospital, and another person talking to an invisible person, and they both look hungry and cold, I think, why are they not in a mental hospital? Why does the police not arrest them, not to go to jail, but take custody of them to take them to the hospital And then I know the reason is when they get to the hospital, there's nothing to do with them. So they wind up in a homeless shelter and they're not getting either medical care or adequate really care of any kind. So as a society, when we look at mass shootings, I think it's not good that we barely mention in the middle of one report that that person, as the last mass shooting did, my understanding from one report of the many that I've been able to look at, specifically looking for mention of that, one report mentioned that he had seen a mental health professional. So here's a guy that perhaps because of recent standards, the way insurance works, perhaps not, perhaps his psychiatrist overlooked something, but I doubt it because I know what the current thinking is with how you're supposed to deal with things. And it's much harder to put people in a lockup facility, partly for medical reasons and partly because there is not as many places to put them. So I don't know what people do with that, but I don't see it being talked about. And so I don't know, maybe one person sees this that has somehow the ability to throw some money at the mental hospitals and throw some money at psychiatric training and the numbers of psychiatrists out there. I've heard it said, and I have, like I said, visited both the general population and death row multiple times. And I've heard it said in many ways, the prisons are, for many of the people there, psychiatric wards, because had they been cared for properly, perhaps they would have been locked away or somehow avoided what happened to them and their victim. Okay, that's all I got. We keep doing my walk.